Hey everybody, welcome to Around the Farm, the podcast about all things ag. I'm your host, Clint Schaffer, and today we're going to be talking with Dr. Amanda Easterly and Dr. Cody Creech from the University of Nebraska. And we're going to be talking about optimizing your wheat rotations, so stay tuned. Dr. Easterly, Dr. Creech, welcome to Around the Farm. How about you give an introduction to the listeners here?
All right. Thank you again for having us. My name is Amanda Easterly, and I am a research assistant professor at the High Plains Ag Lab near Sidney, Nebraska. And I get to work with Dr. Cody Creech also on the call in dryland cropping systems research.
And I am Dr. Cody Creech. I'm located up here at the Panhandle Research and Extension Center located in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. And as Dr. Easterly said, we do a dryland crop research and focus really on like the water use efficiency of crops and the different types of rotations that we can do in this type of environment that we are living in.
Gotcha. Well, again, welcome to the show as well. So I know that that both of you are really involved in a lot of different testing at your facilities there. What are some of the kind of the different tests and experiments that y'all are running?
We do a little bit of everything. We do small plot research, looking at single year variety performance, all the way to multi-year environments or multi-year testing, where we look at different rotations, long-term soil health properties, and so forth. We run quite the gamut. And with Dr. Creech's background in weed science and cropping systems, I have a background in plant breeding and genetics. We can bring a lot of really cool research to the table.
And I think just kind of to add on to Amanda's comments, because of the environment that we live in out here with we have about 16 inches of rainfall out here. Producers are willing to try anything if it can handle the dry weather that we have and the environment that we have. They will try about any type of crop or any different a scenario. So not only do we work in corn and soybean, but we also work in wheat and sunflowers and proso millet and field peas and many other crops, because they will try just about anything if they think it might work.
I could imagine. I mean, I think that's a little. Actually, I think more than or less than half of the rainfall that we get annually on our farms. So I can't imagine all the different trials and experiments trying to find that right crop for that environment there. So, I tell you what, my background is corn and soybeans, and I have to be honest with you, with the both of you. I don't know a ton about wheat, so I am excited to have this conversation today and really dig in and learn a lot more. So, what's been some of the most exciting steps that really have happened within wheat over the last 10 years?
Yeah, so as far as just things that are exciting about wheat, there's been a lot of work, at least in our area specifically, looking at a pest we have out here is wheat stem sawfly, and it's just a horrible pest that there's really no good solution to actively manage that pest. And what wheat stem sawfly does is it lays an egg in the wheat stem, and it burrows down in that wheat stem, and it girdles the bottom of the stem, causing the wheat to lodge. And it can cause a lot of issues come harvest time. And probably for the past 10 years or so, it's been a big issue here in Nebraska and down into northeast Colorado. It's been a big issue up in Montana for quite a while. And I guess we were the fortunate ones to get to have it next. But a lot of work has gone into that pest as far as understanding kind of its biology, how it works, and as well as on the breeding side, the breeders are trying to develop lines that are more resistant or tolerant to this pest, so that they will stand up better to it. Because there's really nothing that we can spray to control it. We can't really manage it other ways, so developing some type of resistance into our wheat lines is going to be the best solution for us.
And to follow up on that, the sawfly really is the biggest hurdle that wheat producers in our region are facing. And I'm married to a farmer, and it's really devastating to go out to a field that was standing beautifully a week ago, and you go just grab a handful of stems and they just come up like straws that have been just cut at the base. So that's one of our biggest challenges. One of the other newer technologies that is coming into the market is, of course, unlike corn and soybeans, wheat does not have transgenic varieties available. And so weed control can be a big issue as well. And there are 2 herbicide mode of actions now that are non-transgenic to allow 2 different herbicides to be used beyond as well as aggressor. And so having varieties that are tolerant to those has been a big benefit to growers in our region as well.
Yeah, you talk about walking out in that field, and we've seen it on our farm as well, right? You can be growing the most beautiful crop, and all of a sudden something happens, and it's not so beautiful anymore. And so anything that we can do to prevent that, I think, is always key. Dr. Easterly, you talked about having breeding and genetics, and it's always I always like to jump into part of that as well. Have you seen the yield and protein levels of wheat increase over the past decade?
I would say yes, and it's not just genetics. I think, and the growers on the whole are really, really innovative folks, and they figure out ways and work with their agronomists and their seedsmen to find solutions that bring a whole package together. So the genetics are one big piece of it, and then you combine the right genetics with the right agronomic practices to really stack the deck in your favor.
Well, and talking about some of those agronomic pieces, I know one of the conversations that's really happening is really around fertility and just access to fertilizer and things of that nature. What are you seeing farmers trying to do to really maximize their fertilizer efficacy moving forward into this next season?
Yeah, that's something that has been a big issue for our producers as far as especially with the wheat crop that's might not generate the same amount of revenue as a corn or a soybean crop. They have to be smart about how they spend those dollars. And one thing that we recommend our growers do to get the most out of that nitrogen that they put on is to think about that timing. If you put it all on in the fall, there's a chance that it might leach out of that soil profile. If you think about, again, it doesn't have a big root system. It's there near the top of the soil. Those top 6-8 inches is where that bulk of those roots are going to be. And if we get a little bit of rain, that's going to move that nitrogen out of that profile. And so we like to split up our applications if we can. And there's 2 periods that we like to target as far as having the right amount of nitrogen there available to the plant. One of them is just there before jointing. We want to make sure we have that available because that's when that wheat crop determines its actual yield potential. So if it's short nitrogen, then it's going to be short on your yield as well. However, that's not when it uses the most nitrogen. It uses the most nitrogen as that wheat crop matures and it starts to develop that head. So it's absolutely critical that we have that nitrogen available there at the very end of that growing period. And so if a grower only has the ability to put on 20 pounds of N in a given year for some reason, we're going to recommend that they try to put that on as late as possible so it's available when that plant most needs it.
Other agronomic pieces are, especially in wheat, where historically farmers planted, a bushel to the acre was the rule of thumb for seeding. As opposed to our corn and soybean production, where we're targeting a certain number of plants per acre. Historically, everything was based on a pounds per acre basis for planting. And so one of the other things that we are really honing in on is looking at the variability that you can see in seed size and targeting, seeds per acre, and then also being mindful of getting a good stand early in the year so that you have good competition, good growth, ultimately good yield.
You talk about some of the planting rates, and Dad and I, we always try to make it a point to run different trials, right? You talk about different populations and whatnot. Are those the same kind of trials that farmers are doing within wheat as well? I mean, are they doing different stand counts or population trials as they're trying different tactics?
I think a lot do, and a lot, are starting to look more closely at their seed when it comes in to adjust accordingly. And then, of course, timing plays an issue in wheat. So if you're coming in as we see more wheat moving back into some traditional corn and soybean areas as you move further east, which I think is a real benefit to growers to start incorporating wheat, when they can, even if they're not used to growing it, is timing your seeding rate and your timing of planting appropriately. So if you're coming in after soybeans, you need to bump the population up a little bit to get good fall growth in that winter wheat. If you're coming in early, you keep it a little more standard, but you have to hedge your bets as you move through the planting season.
You talked about that wheat starting to move into different locations. I would imagine some of the fluctuations in the commodity prices. I mean, as that started impacting on farmers wanting to plant more wheat than maybe what they have in the past.
I think you can see that with just the cost of the inputs right now. Wheat's a fairly low input crop, and so if that's something that a producer wants to try to control, they can get wheat in that rotation and control some of those input costs, and still be able to grow a crop in basically half a year. And so it really has wheat has a place in a rotation from that standpoint. But also, if a grower needs access to that field later in the year, whether they are close to a cattle operation and then they need a place to go out, mid-year and spread manure, that's going to be an option. Or if they want to come in behind it and grow a forage crop, they can do that as well. And so it provides some flexibility in a crop rotation to think about putting wheat in a crop rotation.
To follow up on that, I also think it's another tool in the toolbox for a lot of growers that are used to corn and soybeans. Again, if you think about division of labor, as it's difficult to find labor sometimes, if you're able to spread out your efforts in labor across the year, that can be helpful as well. If you have a hard time getting to all of your beans in the fall, well, if you transition some of those acres to soybean, then you're able to help spread that load out and not be pushing quite as hard. Plus, you also have the benefit of really good residue. So if you have a wheat crop and you leave that residue over the winter, you have some natural weed suppression into the fall, and you maintain some good soil structure, and then you can no-till corn in behind it.
Well, and that leads right into my next question, which is soil health, crop rotation. What is I guess, what is that best crop rotation that you end up seeing, or maybe what are the different crop rotations that farmers are doing in your neck of the woods there to really maximize their output?
So where we're based, wheat is the cornerstone crop. That's just the long and short of it. Historically, most rotations were a wheat fallow. So it alternated as just a simple 2-year rotation with the idea that fallow period allowed the soil to retain more moisture. Over time and through a lot of research done by Cody's and my predecessors, it's actually been found that fallow really is not as efficient as it was once thought. So a good number of growers have intensified their operations, moving to 3 and 4 year rotations, whether that's wheat, corn, fallow, wheat, corn, millet, fallow, or some variation thereof. And then, of course, we do have growers adding in for soil health and for diversifying their operations, things like field peas and sunflowers, so that we're not growing all grass type species.
Yeah, and what we've seen is folks have intensified those rotations and maybe even diversified those rotations away from wheat fallow. Our soil health has improved. Just because if you think about a fallow period, you have that period where there's nothing growing, and for those microbes and things in the soil, it's just not very good for those those natural processes that are going on. And so by keeping something growing in the soil all the time, as we know with cover crops and other things, it is really beneficial to our soil health, and I think that helps our whole system overall in the long run.
And just as fertilizer prices aren't getting any lower, chemical prices generally aren't either. So if you're going to have to be using, some sort of pest management system to keep your weeds down, you may as well be getting a crop out of that season as well.
Yeah, and that's, pardon my ignorance here. I'm going to have to ask a couple basic questions just for my lack of knowledge here. But when you talk about fallow ground, you're talking about, it's bare soil, right? I mean, there's no crop that's planted. And at that point, are you still doing a weed control on that fallow ground then as well?
Well, hopefully it's not totally bare ground. Hopefully you have residue from the previous crop that's helping to maintain some of that soil cover. And so historically, fallow periods, again, were just simply bare ground, and it was maintained weed-free through, running through the field with whatever implement made sense. A lot of our growers do use more of a no-till chem fallow system. And so the fallow, the weed-free conditions are maintained through herbicides.
Yeah, so if you think about for example, a wheat corn fallow rotation, which is fairly common out here, that corn would be planted in that wheat residue, and then of course we harvest it in October, November, and then that corn residue would be sitting there in the field the following year until we plant our wheat crop again, which would be in September. And so we would plant directly into those corn stalks that are remaining in the following year, September. So it sits open about 13 months of the year. There's nothing going on other than hopefully weed control.
All right. Well, one other question that I got too. You may laugh at me here, but we farm over in Illinois and we farm corn and soybeans. Is this a crop rotation that Dad and I need to be considering rolling wheat into our operation?
Well, as Amanda mentioned, there are a lot of benefits to wheat in a rotation. One of the things that maybe folks don't realize is how competitive wheat is with weeds. And so we've done a lot of work out here looking at wheat in rotations, in irrigated rotations. And just by putting wheat in 1 out of every 4 years can have a big impact on the seed bank of weeds in your cropping system, because especially winter wheat, it comes up, it's thick, it has a good stand. And it does a fantastic job of suppressing weeds, even like Palmer amaranth. We can have if you have a really good stand of wheat, you have very few Palmer amaranth plants can get up through that wheat crop. However, of course, once you harvest that wheat crop in July, because of Palmer amaranth's germination pattern, you might have some that emerge late in the year, and you're going to have to plan for that and control those plants then. But it does a really good job suppressing weeds. And also it, like I mentioned before, it opens up the opportunity to grow a second crop behind that wheat crop. And so we find the more we can diversify our crop rotations, it really throws off those weed cycles. And so Palmer amaranth does well because of that corn soybean rotation. We're not out in that field in that late summer period when we can't be out there controlling those weeds at that point. By throwing that wheat crop in, it gives us a chance to get out there and spray something different or do something different that's going to kind of throw that weed crop off its normal pattern.
And in your neck of the woods, you have a little bit longer growing season than we do. I mean, we're sitting up here at near altitudes to Denver. So we've got a pretty short growing season. There are a good chunk of folks in Illinois that can double crop behind wheat and put a short day soybean in there, or short season soybean. and get 2 crops out of that year. So
Well, I love trying to convince my old man to do something new, So, it may be one of those. I may have to get one or both of you on a call with him one of these days, and to convince him. But no, that's just fascinating. I think to both your points, I think anytime that you can just do that, a different crop rotation and try some new things, I think it's always exciting. I think it's one of the things I love about the agricultural community is everybody always wants to continue to learn, which is brings me back to trials. Do you see a lot of farmers within the wheat community running a lot of different types of trials throughout the year? And if so, what would be some of those that you'd see them participating in?
we see a good mix. In Nebraska, we're fortunate. Our extension service does on-farm testing, and so you can pair with a local extension agent and help do some large-scale trials on your own operation. Of course, a lot of growers will also say, I'm going to plant a strip of this and a strip of that side by side, see what happens. And then in addition, we're fortunate that we have, as researchers ourselves, we have good collaborations with growers in the region who gratefully, share farm ground with us, and we can go put, a pretty good sized variety trial out there and test 50 to 60 varieties in a field, get an idea of how they perform, in that space and time, and then compare how things change, as you move geographically or move year to year.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, our growers are not by any means set in their ways out here. They will try anything. If there is a crop that will germinate, they will try it. And so we have growers that just on their own will go out and plant, a new variety of dry bean, or will go out and soybeans, dryland soybeans out here. Folks do it, and they, typical yields for us in dryland soybeans are about 25 to 30 bushel out here. And folks will absolutely do it because it's just something different, and it's that they will try it. I guarantee it.
You can't believe that low soybean yield, can you? I won't tell you what a good corn yield looks like.
That's always the fun part about talking to folks in different areas, right? Yields vary, inputs vary, everything really kind of varies across the board, and it's always fascinating to talk to folks like yourself that are in a different geography and kind of experience different things of that nature. So it's always fun to have these conversations. So. One of the things that I'd also look at on the trial side of things, collecting that data, making sure that we're tracking things appropriately is always key, right? Trying to learn what we did last year to make sure that we can make the changes in the next season. What are some of the tools that you use to really help track some of that data throughout the season?
I think there's two different ways to look at this. The first way you can look at it is from a grower side, and I really encourage our growers to try new things. However, when you try new things, you got to be willing to have the correct some type of a check or a control, so that that you're doing something different. Just going out and trying and planting a whole field to a certain crop or variety doesn't really help you. If we can split that field up in a couple different ways, it's going to help the grower know what's going on. One thing I talk a lot to our producers about is adjuvants. When they're out spraying, there's a lot of adjuvants on the market, partly because there's no real set standard for adjuvants, right? So we have a lot of different companies that are in that field, a lot of different products that might say NIS on them. Doesn't mean that they're, this NIS product might not be as good as that one. And the only way we can know which one works best is to, mix up one spray tank with one and go spray it in the field, and then go mix up another tank of something else and spray it right next to it and see what we like. And so on the grower side, that's what we have to do. We have to make those comparisons. But on a university side, we're able to make that a lot smaller into those small research plots where we can apply a lot of different treatments. And for us, we can be out there more intensively taking probably a higher level of data that a grower would want to do. And then we try to get that information digested in some way that a grower can use it, that they can understand it and use it. Because if they can understand it and use it and apply it in the field, then we're not doing our job as researchers.
And we are also finding new and exciting ways on the university side to leverage our counterparts in other departments. I am not a programmer by any stretch of imagination. I can do enough data analysis and so forth to get out what I need. But we've recently partnered with another group on campus, and we're working towards developing web-based applications that growers can use to track the data that we're collecting on those small plots over time.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I know that having access to that data and really being able to dig into it and like I said, just understand what works and what doesn't work. That's probably one of the most important pieces there. So it's always exciting to hear about the data collection process. So. One other question that I have too, this is just probably more of a personal question as well, and my curiosity. Does wheat have different relative maturity ranges like soybeans and corn?
Wheat tends to be, yes, it does have different maturity ranges, but they're not maybe labeled as intensively as for corn and for soybeans. So I don't have anyone coming and asking me for a 240-day wheat, for example. But we do see relative differences in maturities. And similar to what you would do in any other operation, most growers are diversifying their portfolio as far as maturities go, knowing that, if I have a field that it's tough to get to during harvest, I'm going to plant something a little later maturity so that it's still standing well by the time I get to that field.
Gotcha. Okay. As I said, I guess I was always curious about that, so I figured y'all would be the right folks to ask. So, one last question I got for you both. As you look out into the future, I've asked you about some of the steps that the wheat has seen just over the past let's say 10 years. Looking out into the future, what's the most exciting thing that you see from both your perspectives that are really going to have a big impact on wheat moving forward?
Well, I'm hoping that Amanda will talk about her hybrid wheat experience, but I will share, as far as what I see as being a big thing. We've really wheat's kind of been kind of the ugly stepchild where it hasn't really been, I guess, had a lot of attention given to it from the management side, and I think we can really elevate this crop to a new level just by how we manage it. We can manage it more intensively, and we can provide better recommendations to our producers to do that. So we are working a lot right now to revise our fertility management for wheat. Again, we have new varieties that are just far better varieties than we did 10, 15, 20 years ago, and we need to constantly update those recommendations. And so I think by working on the agronomic side of things, we can really elevate this wheat crop to yield better, but more importantly, have better quality from the protein and the baking and milling side, which is what bakers and millers want, is that quality at the end of the day, because that helps us as far as like our wheat value. It's really all about the quality, and so if we don't have good quality wheat, nobody wants to buy it. And so we can do a lot of that just by how we manage that wheat crop.
Yeah, that's a piece that we really haven't talked about yet today, is that unlike a lot of other commodity grains, wheat is a commodity, but it's graded based on the quality aspects because it is, moving directly into our breads and our cakes and our cookies. And so that quality piece plays a huge role. And so there's continual efforts to breed and develop varieties that are more opportunistic and take good advantage of our management decisions, and then paired, again, as Cody mentioned, with really honing in on what management matters and translates to that quality as well as yield. I think is helpful. In our part of the world, we were a little bit slower to adopt some of the like prescription fertility regimens and things, but as those technologies become more accessible and as fertilizer and input prices continue to rise, more and more growers are moving towards that sort of a model, even in wheat, and looking to try to optimize as best they can.
That makes sense. You know, that actually brings up one more question, even though I said that last one was my last. But you know, what is more important, or maybe they're directly related? But I guess from a wheat perspective, you bring up the quality and the protein level and things of that nature. What's more important, the quality or the yield?
Both, because both are going to really drive a grower's bottom line. I mean, I can raise 70 bushel wheat, but if it doesn't have any protein, I'm going to take it to the elevator and not make, enough to offset my costs. On the flip side, if I can, get a pretty good yield, which is negatively correlated with grain protein, generally speaking, if I can manage those two and keep them both at good competitive levels, a lot of times I can go to the elevator and get a premium because the quality is higher. And then the bakers and the end users are able to blend that off and produce a higher quality flour.
Well, that is, again, a process that I am just not familiar with, but it's absolutely fascinating to me. So, you know, wheat is something that is a big part of probably all of our lives, right? As you think about, you mentioned bread and cake and cookies, my mouth's watering sitting here thinking about that. Getting close to lunch here, I'm getting hungry. So I have to go find me some wheat bread here. So, Dr. Easterly, I got to ask. I know Dr. Creech just mentioned hybrid wheat, and I know I don't even know what to ask, but I feel like we need to have that discussion. So, can you give us some insight around that?
Well, hybrid wheat is a thing. It's actually been tested a number of times, dating all the way back to the 1950s. There was a pretty good push in the 80s and early 90s to try to get hybrid wheat off the ground. And of course, hybrid corn is, we wouldn't have the corn crops that we have today if we didn't have those single cross hybrids. And so the idea historically has been, can we leverage that same sort of heterosis, that hybrid advantage in wheat as well? And so, again, wheat is a cornerstone crop, for us out here in this neck of the world. And then it's also fundamental calorie source for a lot of us. If you think, I hardly go a day without bread. So if we can increase our yields that way, is hybrids one of those ways that we can do that? The challenge with hybrid wheat is that you have a structure of the plant that makes it difficult to make hybrids. A corn plant has the tassels and the silks are separate. So to produce hybrid corn, all you have to go do is strip off the tassels and have, whatever you want to use as the male parent right next door. In wheat, it's all encapsulated in that single floret on the head. So it logistically is just more of a challenge to make hybrid wheat. And so there are a number of ways that I won't go into today that you can try to force a wheat plant to hybridize. But it is a growing interest, again, in research areas and in the commercial sector. There are hybrid wheats currently being grown, and a good chunk of those are in Europe, where their yields can sustain the added seed costs. I am hopeful, both because it's something near and dear to me, and that I think, again, it adds another tool for growers, is that hybrid wheat can get off the ground here in the US and be, again, another way that we can improve yields and, incorporate other traits that are useful to growers.
So it really sounds like the hybrid, getting a wheat hybrid is possible. That's there. It's really
It's possible, not cheap.
Yeah, not cheap, and it sounds like maybe is it the commercialization of it, of trying to get large scale hybrid seeds at that point in time? Is that kind of the difficult aspect?
I think from a financial standpoint, that is the most difficult aspect in getting hybrid wheat going. And then there's also the genetics side of it. Again, going back to a corn analogy, we have heterotic pools. So when you make a hybrid for a corn hybrid, you're picking from one pool and the other pool, basically trying to maximize that hybrid combination. Wheat has been bred, for continued quality. There's not necessarily those distinct heterotic pools. And so it's a total mindset and shift for wheat breeders to go from thinking about traditional cultivar development into hybrid parent development.
Yeah, that sounds like a whole industry shift right there.
It really is. So.
Well, that is fascinating. So again, that sounds like we could probably have an entire podcast dedicated to hybrid wheat maybe one of these days.
It's a pretty interesting topic, but yeah, there's a lot that goes into it.
So as farmers are listening and maybe wanting to gather some more information and maybe do some research for their own farms, where would you kind of point somebody that wants to learn more about wheat to go get some more information, whether it's books or podcasts or websites, but where could you point some of our listeners at to go chase down some more information around wheat?
Yeah, so for our university, we put all of our research out on Crop Watch. So from variety testing to research summaries, it's all on cropwatch.unl.edu. That's the quick and easiest way to find things with the University of Nebraska.
And I'll be honest, I don't listen to too many podcasts. I have small children, so I have to listen to, really fun music on the ride into town every day. But my first recommendation for folks that are more interested would be simply go reach out, start looking for information. A good source is always your local extension office. A lot of times, if those folks don't know answers, they'll know someone who does. Of course, local agronomists are also good resources. And then reach out to folks around the region, around the country, see what's working for them. Again, we're totally different regions and growing environments, but there's a lot we can learn from each other.
Is there a good group of folks on Twitter? I know that's where a lot of people go anymore to connect. That's kind of where I call the virtual coffee shop. But do you see some information getting transferred there?
We do, and again, I think that's an excellent starting place. So get some ideas there, take them to some other trusted advisors, and start making plans.
Yeah, most of us researchers are on Twitter and easily accessible on Twitter, so folks can always message us that way and reach out to us.
Dr. Easterly, Dr. Creech, I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to come on here on Around the Farm and give us this really in-depth look at wheat. I have a ton more questions, so at some point I ask, will you come back on the show and have another conversation with us?
You bet.
We'd be delighted. Yep.
Great.
Thank you again for having us.
No, like I said, I appreciate your time. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I just want to say thank you to Dr. Easterly and Dr. Creech for joining us here on Around the Farm today. Also, thank you, the listener. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave us a comment along the way as well. Also, Around the Farm is brought to you by Climate FieldView. And until next time, we'll see you around the farm.